"Mommy, there's a beautiful woman on the wing." Beth looked at her 6-year-old daughter and smiled. Imagination. 15 minutes later, both engines of the airplane stopped working over the Pacific Ocean. What happened during the next 47 minutes, no one has been able to explain to this day. A miracle of the Virgin Mary at 35,000 feet of altitude. But before we continue, leave a comment saying where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I would love to see just how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary are reaching. You know that type of person who arrives at the airport 3 hours before the flight? The one who checks the boarding pass before it's even necessary, organizes the carry-on with transparent little bags for everything, and keeps staring at the flight board even when they already know everything is fine. Beth was that person, 40 years old, a financial analyst in Chicago. The kind of professional banks hire when the subject is high-risk investment. Millions of dollars passed through her hands every single day. Charts going up, charts going down. Decisions that had to be made in seconds. A comma in the wrong place could mean the difference between profit and loss of a fortune. And Beth never made mistakes. At least, that's what she liked to believe. Her personal life was another story. That March morning, she was sitting in an airport in Australia with her 6-year-old daughter beside her, Wendy. A small girl for her age, brown hair tied back in a slightly crooked ponytail, and eyes that always seemed to be observing something adults couldn't see. Wendy was quiet. She spoke very little, but when she did speak, it was precise, like that time at her 5th birthday. Beth had bought a huge cake, decorated with cartoon characters. She had invited Wendy's classmates, hired a clown, organized everything down to the smallest detail. Wendy looked at all of it and said only, "Mommy, I just wanted to stay with Grandma today," Wendy said softly. Beth had been left speechless. All that work, all that money, and her daughter only wanted to be with her grandmother. At the time, Beth didn't understand. She thought it was just a child's whim. Today she understood. Wendy knew what truly mattered. When her grandmother passed away 6 months earlier, Wendy stayed quiet for weeks, quieter than usual, and she began carrying a small blue rosary in the pocket of her jacket, the last gift her grandmother had given her. Beth had never paid much attention to that rosary. To her, it was just an object, a keepsake, something for Wendy to feel closer to her grandmother. But Wendy treated that rosary as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Have you ever noticed how children get attached to certain things? It doesn't have to be the most expensive toy or the prettiest one. Sometimes it's an old piece of cloth, a stuffed animal missing an eye, an object that makes absolutely no sense to us. But to them, it's everything. Wendy's rosary was like that. Her grandmother, Beth's mother, lived at 15 minutes from their house in Chicago. She picked Wendy up from school at least twice a week because Beth worked late. The two of them spent entire afternoons together. The grandmother taught Wendy how to bake cookies, told stories from when she was a child, and prayed with her before bedtime. Margaret, that was the grandmother's name, 73 years old when she passed away. A woman who had never made much money, never traveled outside the country, but who had raised 3 children almost entirely on her own after her husband left young, who knew every neighbor by name, who left food at the door of anyone who was struggling without drawing attention, and who had unshakable faith. Beth grew up watching her mother pray every night, watching her light candles, say novenas, talk to the Virgin Mary, as if she were a close friend. One day you'll understand. When you need it most, you'll understand, Margaret used to say. Beth found it beautiful, truly. But she never took part. It wasn't that she didn't believe in God. It was more that she didn't have time. There was always a report to finish, a call to make, an email to answer. When her mother got sick, Beth did what she knew how to do. She organized. She researched the best doctors, the best treatments. She controlled every detail. but her mother passed away anyway. And Beth was left with the feeling that she had wasted too much time on things that didn't matter. 6 months later, she was sitting in that airport with her daughter, returning from a trip that was supposed to be a new beginning. 2 weeks in Australia, just the two of them, the first trip alone with Wendy since the divorce. Ah, yes, the divorce. Richard had left 8 months earlier, said Beth worked too much and had forgotten how to live. She didn't argue. She simply signed the papers and moved on, because that's what she did. She moved on. So there she was, 40 years old, divorced, with a 6-year-old daughter who barely spoke, and a mother who had passed away without Beth having had time to say everything she wanted to say. The trip to Australia had been an attempt to fix something, to reconnect with Wendy, to prove, mainly to herself, that she could be a good mother even doing everything alone. But 2 weeks had gone by far too quickly. And Beth had spent much of them answering work emails while Wendy played alone on the beach. Some things are hard to change, aren't they? We create patterns, habits, ways of functioning. And even when we know they aren't working, we keep doing the same thing. Because it's easier, because it's familiar, because change is frightening. The flight to Los Angeles was long, almost 15 hours. 15 hours over the Pacific Ocean, that vast blue expanse that seems to have no end. Beth had booked a window seat for Wendy and an aisle seat for herself. The plane took off at 11 in the morning. The sky was clear. The pilot announced that the flight would be smooth. Beth opened her laptop before they even reached cruising altitude. Wendy pressed her forehead against the window and stared outside. The first few hours passed without anything special. The plane crossed the Pacific in a straight line. Down below, only water as far as the eye could see. Beth was focused on a spreadsheet when she felt Wendy poke her arm. "Mommy," Wendy called. Beth didn't take her eyes off the screen. "There's a pretty woman out there," Wendy said. Beth finally looked at her daughter. Wendy had her face pressed against the window, pointing somewhere outside. "Where, sweetheart?" Beth asked. "On the wing. She's on the wing," Wendy replied. Beth smiled. She leaned over to look out the window. She only saw clouds, the blue sky, the tip of the airplane's wing. "It's just a reflection, love. Sometimes we see strange things on the glass," Beth said. Wendy didn't answer. She kept staring. Beth went back to her laptop. 15 minutes later, it happened. You know that sound a plane makes when it's flying? That constant hum of the engines that you stop noticing after a while? It's like white noise, something that's always there in the background. Well, that sound stopped. It didn't fade. It didn't sputter. It simply stopped. The silence was so sudden that Beth lifted her head from the laptop instantly. She looked around, saw other passengers doing the same thing. That quiet confusion of people who know something is wrong, but don't know exactly what. And then the lights flickered, once, twice, and went out. Natural light was still coming in through the windows, but the cabin went dark. The emergency lights came on, those faint lights along the floor that show the path to the exits. Beth felt a knot in her stomach. The plane was losing altitude. It wasn't a sudden drop. It was more like when you're in an elevator that's descending too fast, that feeling that your body is lighter than it should be. A flight attendant ran down the aisle, and then came the pilot's voice over the intercom. Calm, controlled. But Beth recognized the tone. It was the same tone she herself used when something was going very wrong, and she needed to stay calm so she wouldn't scare everyone else. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a technical situation. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Crew, prepare the cabin. Prepare the cabin. Beth knew what that meant. She looked at Wendy. The girl was strangely calm. She wasn't crying. She wasn't scared. She was just looking out the window, with one hand in her jacket pocket, holding the rosary. Wendy. Beth's voice came out higher than she wanted. Wendy, look at Mommy. Wendy slowly turned her face. "It's okay, Mommy," Wendy said. "What do you mean it's okay? Can't you hear?" Beth was cut off. "She's here," Wendy said. "Who's here?" Beth asked, feeling a chill run through her. "The beautiful woman in the blue mantle. She's smiling at me," Wendy replied. Beth looked out the window. She saw nothing. Just the ocean below, much closer than it should have been. Just the clouds rushing past too fast. "Wendy, there's no one," Beth began. "She said something, Mommy," Wendy interrupted. Beth stopped. Something in her daughter's voice made her stop. "What did she say?" Beth asked. Wendy looked into her mother's eyes, those big, calm eyes that seemed to know things no one else knew. "Everything will be okay," Wendy said. And that was the moment Beth felt it. The smell of roses. Have you ever smelled something that shouldn't be there? Like when you're in a crowded subway and suddenly smell lavender perfume? Or when you're in a closed office and smell the sea? It was like that, but stronger. The smell of roses in the middle of an airplane in an emergency at 30,000 feet over the Pacific Ocean. Beth looked around. No one else seemed to notice. The other passengers were too busy panicking. A woman was crying a few rows back. A man was trying to turn on his cell phone even though he knew it wouldn't work. A flight attendant was moving down the aisle, checking seat belts with trembling hands. But the smell was there, strong, unmistakable. Roses. In the cockpit, Captain Thomas Miller was breaking out in a cold sweat. 32 years of career, more than 20,000 flight hours. He had landed planes with only one engine. He had flown through storms that would make any passenger pray. He had trained in every simulator, practiced every emergency procedure, and he had never seen anything like this. Both engines had simply stopped. No warning, no prior alarm. 1 second they were working normally, the next, silence. It hadn't been a gradual failure. It hadn't been overheating, nor lack of fuel, nor any of the dozens of causes he knew. The co-pilot, James, was running through all the restart procedures. Nothing worked. It was as if the engines had simply decided they were done working. "Altitude?" Miller asked. 31,000 feet and descending. Descent rate, 1,200 feet per minute, James replied. Miller did the calculations in his head. At that rate, they had less than 30 minutes before hitting the water, and they were in the middle of the Pacific. The nearest coast was hundreds of kilometers away. They weren't going to make it. Ditching. "Notify the cabin." James picked up the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the seatbelt sign. Please make sure your seatbelts are securely fastened and your tray tables are in the upright position. Crew, emergency positions." In the cabin, Beth fastened Wendy's seatbelt, then her own. Her hands were shaking so badly she struggled with the buckle. A flight attendant stopped beside them. "Ma'am, when the captain gives the command, you'll need to lean forward, hug your knees, and protect your head, the child as well." "Do you understand?" the attendant said. Beth nodded. She couldn't speak. The flight attendant looked at Wendy. The girl was far too calm, strangely calm. "Is she okay?" the attendant asked. Beth didn't know what to say. "She's praying," Beth answered. The flight attendant nodded and moved on. Beth looked at her daughter. Wendy had taken the rosary out of her pocket. The blue beads slid slowly between her small fingers. "Wendy," Beth began. "She said not to be afraid, Mommy," Wendy said. "Who said that?" Beth asked. "The pretty lady, the one on the wing. She said everything is going to be okay," Wendy replied. Beth wanted to say it was impossible. She wanted to explain that they were in the middle of the ocean, that there was nowhere to land, that physics simply did not allow a powerless airplane to land safely on water. But she couldn't, because at that moment, looking at her daughter with that rosary in her hands, Beth remembered her own mother. The mother who had so much faith, the mother who prayed every day, the mother Beth had never had time to listen to. And for the first time in many years, perhaps for the first time in her adult life, Beth closed her eyes and did something she no longer knew how to do. She asked for help, not out loud, not with elaborate words, just a simple, desperate thought rising from deep in her chest. Please, please. In the cockpit, something strange was happening. Co-pilot James stared at the instruments with a confused expression. "Captain," James called. "What is it?" Miller asked. "The descent rate. It's decreasing," James said. Miller looked. It was true. They had gone from 1,200 feet per minute down to 800. Then to 600. "That doesn't make any sense," James said. "No engine, no propulsion. We should be falling faster, not slower." Miller didn't answer. He was too busy trying to understand what he was seeing. The plane was gliding. Every plane can glide, of course. Even without an engine, the wings still generate lift. It's basic physics. But there is a limit. Every aircraft has a specific glide ratio, and their plane was breaking those laws. "What's our glide ratio?" Miller asked. James did the calculations, redid them, did them again. He shook his head. 18 to 1, sir," James replied. "That's impossible. This aircraft has a glide ratio of 15 to 1, at most, in perfect conditions." "And these are not perfect conditions," Miller said. "I know, sir. But the numbers are right here. I ran them 3 times, James answered. Miller looked at the instruments, looked out the window, looked back at the instruments. The plane was gliding as if it had angel wings. Miller swallowed hard. 32 years of flying, and he had no explanation for this. 10 minutes passed. 20. 30. The passengers were silent now, that heavy silence of people waiting for the worst. Some were praying, others were quietly crying, others simply stared into nothing. Beth held Wendy's hand. The girl remained calm. From time to time she looked out the window and smiled as if she were seeing something no one else could see. And the smell of roses would not go away. In fact, it seemed stronger. 47 minutes. 47 minutes of engineless gliding over the Pacific Ocean. And then in the cockpit, James shouted, "Land, Captain, there's land!" James yelled. Miller looked ahead. There, on the horizon, a dark shape stood out against the blue of the ocean. An island, not just any island. An island with a runway. "That is—" James couldn't believe what he was seeing. "A runway," Miller finished. "Prepare for approach." "But, sir, that island shouldn't be reachable. By my calculations, we didn't have enough altitude to—" James began. "Forget the calculations. It's there." "We're landing," Miller ordered. Miller picked up the intercom one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have spotted an emergency runway. Prepare for landing." In the cabin, Beth heard the words, but couldn't quite process them. "Runway? What do you mean, runway?" They were in the middle of the ocean. She looked out through Wendy's window, and she saw it. A small island, green, with a gray strip cutting straight through the middle. A runway. "I told you, Mom," Wendy whispered. "She said everything was going to be okay." The landing was perfect. There was no hard impact. There was no fire. There were no screams. The plane touched down as if it were being guided by invisible hands, smooth, precise. The wheels met the asphalt almost silently. It slid along the runway, losing speed gradually until it came to a complete stop just a few meters from the end. Miller kept his hands on the yoke until the aircraft stopped completely. When he finally let go, he realized he was shaking. James was pale. He stared straight ahead without saying a word. "Did you see that?" Miller asked. "I did," James replied. "How did we—" Miller began. "I don't know, sir. I don't know," James said. The two of them fell silent for a moment. Experienced pilots, men trained to handle any emergency. And neither of them had an explanation for what had just happened. There was silence in the passenger cabin as well, and then suddenly all the sounds of the world seemed to return at once. Applause, shouts, crying, embraces. People standing up even before the seatbelt light turned off. Strangers hugging each other as if they were family. A woman on her knees in the aisle praying out loud. Beth didn't stand up. She was looking at Wendy. The girl had put the rosary back into her pocket. She was smiling, a small, calm smile. "Wendy," Beth began. "She left, Mom. She said goodbye," Wendy said. Beth felt the tears before she realized she was crying. She couldn't hold them back. She didn't try. She hugged her daughter tightly, tighter than she had hugged anyone in a very long time. "Thank you," Beth whispered. She didn't know exactly who she was thanking. Wendy? The grandmother? The beautiful lady her daughter had seen on the wing? Maybe all of them. The hours that followed were a whirlwind. Doctors examined all the passengers. Helicopters took people back to the mainland. 2 weeks later, Beth and Wendy were back in Chicago. Life tried to return to normal. Beth tried to return to work, tried to return to routine. But something had changed. One night after putting Wendy to bed, Beth went to unpack the travel bags that were still sitting in a corner of the bedroom. She hadn't had the courage to touch them before. Inside Wendy's backpack, in the inner pocket, she found the jacket her daughter had been wearing on the plane, and in the jacket pocket, the blue rosary. Beth picked up the rosary slowly. The beads felt cold in her hand. Blue like the sky, blue like the ocean, over which they had almost fallen. She sat down on the bed, held the rosary with both hands, and cried. She cried for the mother she had lost, for the mother who had tried so many times to talk about faith, about God, about things bigger than numbers and charts. And Beth had always been too busy. "We'll talk later, Mom." "Not now, Mom. Let's grab a coffee next week, okay?" And next week never came. She cried for the marriage that had ended, for all the nights she had chosen work instead of her husband, for all the time she had said, "Just one more email," and stayed for hours in front of the computer. She cried for the years she had spent working so much that she forgot how to live, for the weekends at the office, for the vacations she never took because there was always something urgent. She cried for the fear she had felt on that plane, that primitive, animal fear of facing the unknown head-on, of realizing that all the control in the world meant nothing. She cried for the miracle she couldn't explain, for the daughter who had seen something she couldn't see, for the beautiful young woman on the wing who had said that everything would be okay. She cried for everything. Do you know what it's like to cry like that? That kind of crying that comes from a place so deep you didn't even know it existed? That feels like it's going to split you in half, but at the same time feels like it's healing you? Beth cried like that night. And when the tears finally stopped, she felt different, lighter maybe, as if she had let go of a weight she didn't even know she was carrying. She looked at the rosary in her hand. "Thank you, Mom." "I should have listened to you," Beth whispered. In the weeks that followed, Beth began to do things differently, small things at first. She left work at 6 o'clock on a Wednesday, something she hadn't done in years. Her co-workers looked at her strangely when she shut down the computer and picked up her bag. "Leaving already?" one colleague asked. "I am. I promised my daughter ice cream," Beth replied. And she went. She took Wendy out for ice cream. They sat at a little table on the sidewalk. Wendy ordered chocolate with sprinkles. Beth ordered lemon. They sat there talking about nothing, watching people walk by. It was the best afternoon Beth had had in months. The following weekend, she took Wendy to the park. She sat on a bench and just watched. Watching her daughter play on the slide, watching the wind sway the trees, watching the clouds drift slowly by. And she didn't feel the urge to check her phone even once. One night before going to sleep, Beth asked, "Wendy, what did you and Grandma do when she picked you up from school?" Wendy thought for a moment. "We used to make cookies. She told stories. And we prayed," Wendy replied. "Prayed?" Beth asked. "Grandma said the Virgin Mary takes care of everyone, that all we have to do is ask," Wendy said. Beth swallowed hard. Do you think it was her?" "On the plane?" Beth asked. Wendy looked at her mother with those big eyes. "Grandma said "The Virgin Mary is always with us, Mommy," Wendy replied. Beth didn't know what to say. She just hugged her daughter. Months later. Beth didn't go to church every Sunday. She didn't pray entire rosaries before going to sleep. But something had changed. She no longer felt the need to control everything, to predict everything, to have an answer for everything. She learned to accept that some things are beyond control, and that this is not weakness. It is wisdom. The blue rosary now stayed on Wendy's nightstand. Sometimes, before going to bed, Beth would go into her daughter's room just to look. The rosary there, small, blue, simple. The same beads her mother had held so many times. The same beads Wendy had held on that plane, and she remembered. The silence of the engines, the smell of roses. Wendy's calm voice saying, "Everything will be okay." And somehow, everything had been okay. 6 months later, Beth and Wendy were on a plane again. This time it was a short flight, Chicago to New York, just over 2 hours. Beth had gotten nervous when Wendy asked if they could travel by plane to visit her cousin in New York, Beth's sister's daughter. The two girls were the same age and adored each other. Her first reaction was to say no, to make up an excuse, to suggest going by car. But she remembered something her mother used to say. Fear isn't meant to be avoided, it's meant to be crossed. So she said yes. Wendy asked for the window seat. Beth agreed without hesitation. When the plane took off, Beth felt her stomach tighten. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and then she opened her eyes and closed the laptop. She wasn't going to work on this flight. For the first time in how long? Years? She couldn't remember the last time she had flown without working. She looked out the window with her daughter, the clouds below, white and fluffy like cotton. The sun shining above, strong and golden, that vast blue expanse that once felt threatening and now felt comforting. The plane was held up by the air, by the wings, by physics, or maybe by something more. "Mommy," Wendy said. "Yes, sweetheart," Beth replied. "Do you think she's still there?" Wendy asked. Beth knew who her daughter was talking about. She looked at the sky, at the clouds, at the endless blue. "I don't know, sweetheart, but if she is, say hi to her for me," Beth said. Wendy smiled, that small, peaceful smile that only she had. "Okay, Mommy," Wendy replied. And for the first time in a very long time, maybe for the first time in her life, Beth didn't need to understand. Some things simply are. And that was enough. The plane landed in New York without any problems. Wendy ran to hug her cousin at the airport. Beth stood still for a moment watching, her daughter, happy, healthy, alive. And she was too. A plane glided for 47 minutes without an engine over the Pacific Ocean. 47 minutes in which it should have fallen into the sea. It found a runway that should not have been reachable, an island in the middle of nowhere, exactly where it needed to be. And a 6-year-old girl holding a blue rosary that her grandmother had given her knew the whole time that everything was going to be okay. Everything will be okay. 3 words, heard from someone only she could see. And everything was okay. Some miracles do not need an explanation. They only need someone small enough to believe. Before finishing, I want to invite you to be part of our prayer community for the Virgin Mary, a space of faith and hope where people from all over the world come together to pray and share the graces they have received. If you feel in your heart the desire to be part of this chain of prayer, click below and become a member of the channel today and come pray with us. And look, if you made it this far to the very end of Beth and Wendy's story, do one thing for me. Write in the comments, "Blue Rosary," blue like the ocean, blue like the mantle of the one who held that plane. I want to see how many hearts this story truly reached. And every time I read that word in the comments, I will know that one more person believes that the miracles of the Virgin Mary still happen. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Write in the comments about a miracle you have already witnessed or experienced, and share this video with someone who needs to renew their hope today. May the Virgin Mary continue blessing and protecting you and your family. Amen.